First of all, I would like to, yeah, okay, yeah. So first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Bindu Lakshmi, Dr. Asha Chitan, and Dr. Sujata Devarpalli for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on gender responsive budgeting, which is currently a very great interest, and especially in response to COVID-19 pandemic, where 204 countries have been affected by this health emergency, and there is a tremendous human misery, starvation, livelihood issues, and also a lot of great unemployment. And now we are talking about financing for gender equality, and how can we use the tool of gender budgeting for gender inclusive pathway in a post-COVID era. One participant can share at a time. Okay, so now, can I share now? How do I do sharing?
You can share, no? You are the co-host, Vibhuti.
Yeah, but it doesn't show one participant can share, right? Okay.
Vibhuti, there is a share screen green button at the bottom.
Yeah, generally. But here they are giving different options. One participant can share at a time, multiple participant can share, and advanced sharing options.
So just do one participant.
Just one participant. Just click that. Yeah.
But then why doesn't it? Got it.
Got it, no?
Yes, got it. Yeah. Is it visible?
It is. It is.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So this presentation is about the transformative financing for gender equality and the role of gender responsive budgeting in this whole because transformative financing would involve a lot of other things also over and about financial allocation, challenging the gender norms, bringing up the new support structures and the legal structures, various forms of affirmative actions that the state and non-state actors need to take. But when we talk about the gender responsive budgeting, it is basically to raise the citizens' awareness on gender and impacts that budgets and policies have on women and men. That means situational analysis becomes very important. Then to change the budgets and policies to promote gender equality. If we think that the previous budgets have been non-inclusive or they have been harming gender concerns, then we need to bring changes. We have seen so many Asian countries where the macroeconomic policies during 80s was only to attract tourists and get foreign exchange by using women's bodies. So that was the time where you can see in so many East Asian, Southeast Asian, and the Fiji Islands and all, women challenged that what we need is a national raising GDP, gross domestic product, but not by wrong means. Even to get the gender equality, the means to attain gender equality should also be gender empowering and gender enabling. To make the governments accountable for gender equality through budgetary commitments, that is what kind of allocations on in which sector you are giving allocation and with what perspective. Currently, there is an organization called MAKAM, Mahila Kisan Adhikar Manch, which is active in 18 states of India. And they say that the agrarian policies, even when we talk about farmers cooperative or Kisan card or this, it is just not including women. So they say that they have demanded changes in this kind of policy, and especially the 3 farm laws, which are harmful to farmers in general and also extremely harmful to women in women farmers, because women farmers are basically the marginal farmers and agricultural laborers and poor peasants. So when we see the stepwise, like stage 1 in gender responsive budgeting is analysis of budget from gender perspective to determine differential impact of budget on women and men, whether it is in case of education, if you take, or whether it is in case of health, or currently the vaccine gap that we are seeing, that whenever you have commercialized services, women are the worst victim of those commercialization. So why we need strengthening of public health. Stage 2 is a reformulating budgetary policies and the description of the resources to distribution of resources to gender equality outcomes. For example, we saw elected representatives in Punjab, where on a national highway at every 2 kilometers, there used to be alcohol shop, liquor shop. And this liquor shop also resulted in massive road rages and accidents, as well as road rage and a lot of mortality of the Punjabi youth. And it was women elected representatives who said that we will not allow this. Why can you have a policy where you give license to liquor shop on the highway? They said, we don't want these people to get unemployed, but at the same and you will have to change these shops into fruit juice. The same people who are selling liquor, they can sell fruit juice. They can sell milkshake and lassi, but not alcohol. So this kind of things have also happened. Stage 3 is working systematically to enable gender, to embed gender within the budgetary processes. That means there are 84 countries in the world where they have said that this kind of embedding of gender in budgeting processes have to be done. In our country, there are 54 ministries and departments where they have to do that. In what way they have responded in a gender inclusive manner. No ministry or no department can say we have nothing to do with gender. Law and order ministry, they can't say that we have to maintain law and order. What have we to do with gender? When there is such a, the cases of violence against women are increasing exponentially, how can any ministry say like that? So step 1 in gender responsive budgeting is identifying gender issues. That means in the sector, whether it's agrarian sector, fisheries, industrial sector, service sector, IT, platform-based economy, future of economy, about which we are talking about. Everywhere, first we have to identify what are the gender issues. So we need visibility of gender in statistics and indicators. So we need to have a collection of information. Currently, we know that there are 4 major studies are commissioned by Ministry of Labor about the migration. How many people went back to the village? Like Dr. Irudaya Rajan, he says that 1/3 have remained in the city and 1/3 have gone to the 65% went back under reverse migration, and nearly 33% have again come back. They have had a circular migration, but no, ministry says they don't know. There is no data. And when we talk about registration of migrant workers and various allocations under the Smart City program, because Smart City program talks only about the technology or a surveillance system or CCTV camera, what we are demanding is that smart cities should be safe cities. They should be pro-working class cities. And the only one state in India, Kerala, has a hostels for the workers, migrant workers. Why can't other states have it? So if this kind of a program we want to implement in the housing sector, we need a baseline information that how many percentage of workers are migrant who are homeless in the city, and we are asking for a state support, because private sector, the moment you are unable to pay rent, private sector will throw you out. That's what happened during the pandemic. Third step is conducting gender analysis of activities. Whichever activities you have taken up, whether it is a Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan or whether it is MG Narega or whether it is a Pradhan Mantri Sadak Yojana, all these things we have to do the gender analysis. PWD, I am recently I'm consultant for government of Maharashtra, where the PWD is constructing 1,200 kilometers road, passing through 6 districts of the state. And most of the engineers, they say, what have we to do gender? Why do they, why? And they got some 1,600 crores grant from ADB. And ADB says, without gender audit, we will not allow the project to pass. And the engineers were wondering, well, how come they are asking for gender audit? What has public road to do with gender? But we have found that wherever you have a pakka road, wherever you have a connectivity, all those villages, they flourish, economic activities increase, children start going to school, maternal mortality reduces, child mortality reduces, health system becomes stronger because you are connected with the civil hospital. So using this gender lens to understand any kind of project, whether it is a physical infrastructure project or social infrastructure projects on education, environment, sanitation, water, electricity. People would say, the electric company would say, what have we to do with gender? Of course, wherever there is electrification, currently also in the most industrialized state of India, which is Maharashtra, 35% villages are without electricity. And we know what happens when the moment things are dark, your mobility is curved, there is more insecurity amongst women and girls. In fact, the study, gender audit, safety audit done by Akshara in Mumbai, has shown, they did this audit in collaboration with Bombay Police, and it shows that there are 400 spots in MMRDA region which are unsafe. And this audit was done after Shakti Mill gang rape. And all these areas which are unsafe, they are not properly lit. There are they are all under construction building without electricity, and even on the road and the approach roads, they are also not properly electrified. So we have to use this gender lens for any kind of programs and policies and implementation that takes place. Step 5 is step 4 is conducting gender analysis of related budget. Okay, so we are not only talking about budget of one particular Ministry of Women and Child, but if it is in the rural area, then we have to also related budget. What is there in the Rural Development Ministry? If we are in a tribal population is there more than say 10-15%, then we have to go through the budget of tribal sub plan also, scheduled caste plan also, because we know there is intersectional marginalities in every community. So budgetary analysis of all these related ministries are also important. Tamil Nadu is a very good example of successful implementation of merging of various ministries. For example, the midday meal program in Tamil Nadu. It is not only, it doesn't come only under women and child. Okay, it is also the senior citizens also eat in that midday meal program. Ministry of Health is also contributing because lactating and pregnant mothers are also eating in the midday meal. So there is a convergence of various ministry and this thing, so which avoids duplication, which avoids wastage of resources, and it also ensures most efficient, most effective targeting of the budgetary allocation. Step 5 is developing objectives and recommendations for equality. So that comes through the experience and getting involved. Now, currently, when you know that in July, 65 countries, they got together in Paris as well as Mexico to decide Rio de Janeiro to discuss how to repair the damages done by the pandemic. And then the question of that, how can we finance for gender equality? And with the mission that to ensure gender needs are met in development planning, money for development to fulfill the gender needs, adequate financing for gender commitments. You may have a very, very impressive scheme, but if it is very scarce, there is no adequate allocation, then it remains only on paper. First, to benefit everyone equally and equitably, so we have to be very, very sensitive to the privileges as well as the privileges of certain communities and marginality of other communities and intersectional marginalities. Affirmative action and targeted efforts for are often needed, especially for those who are at the receiving end of the system, persons with disability or transgender community or SC, ST, ethnic minorities, religious minorities. For that, a special effort need to be made, especially in these 7 vital areas. Access to safe transportation, because without transportation, there can't be mobility, and without mobility, you can't have an effective work participation. Subsidized childcare, because most of the women, whenever there is a paucity of childcare, women have to get out of the workforce, or they have to work part-time, or they are eased out of their job. Emergency shelter and night shelter for homeless. What we have seen recently is that tremendous escalation of violence, gender-based violence, and lot of homelessness also because of inability to pay rent. And this is not only in India, but it has happened in so many developing countries of Asia, Africa, Latin America as a result of lockdown. So emergency shelters and night shelters for homeless become important. Vocational programs. So now we are talking about the wage supply chain was jeopardized during the lockdown. Now there is a new talk. There was a time where everyone used to glorify globalization. Now there is a whole different sentiment that has emerged, is that strengthening the community, so that this kind of pandemic and endemics are going to be pandemics as well as epidemics are going to be endemics. So we need to be prepared, and we should strengthen the local communities. So anytime there is any kind of emergency because of the climate emergency, a disaster, natural disaster, or health emergency, the community should not suffer. because this time we had adequate food, agrarian growth was 11%, but still there was this tremendous starvation that we have seen, which was seen only at the time of First and Second World War, where the British rulers had diverted the grains to feed the army, and that was the kind of a hunger that was created, and similar kind of a hunger that we experienced over the last 18 months among the poverty groups. So that should be, so we have to create the livelihood as well as food security. Hostel for migrant workers, separate toilets for women and differently abled and transgender persons. That is a very important need, because even the Swachhata Abhiyan has not taken care of this kind of issues. Now, we all know that budget represents the financial plan, and it is most significant policy instrument of government for establishing macroeconomic stability, because wherever the country doesn't have macroeconomic stability, you see the kind of human miseries the world faced, Latin American countries faced during 80s, during 90s, Africa faced, and after stabilization policies were implemented in the Asian countries, we saw tremendous human misery, unemployment, galloping inflation, and going down of nutrition standard. So macroeconomic stability is very important. Fiscal efficiency. Currently, all economists are talking about the fiscal expansion. Even for the first time, even IMF and World Bank are also advising the nation states that you need to have a fiscal expansion. State has to play important role to salvage the situation, to do the hand-holding of those who have suffered due to pandemic. Strategic priorities we need to come up with. What is the important priority? Which sector needs more attention in terms of funds, functions, and functionaries, because you also need to allocate human power. And most importantly, for ensuring equitable distribution of resources in the country. Simply put, it is a policy-making tool of the government to translate government's objectives into programs and services to achieve socio-economic development of the country. Now, we also know that the financing for budget classification system. Like we know that budget classification system provides a normative framework for the policy decision making and also accountability. How much money you have allocated? Is there any transparency about it? What is the level of leakage? There was a time when Rajiv Gandhi had said that if you invest 1 rupee in Tamil Nadu, 85 paise will go to the targeted program, 15% will be leakage. If you invest 1 rupee in northern states, you would get 85% will be eaten up. It would be the leakage, and 15 paise would reach the target or the mission. So that is the level of this thing. So accountability becomes very important. Classifying expenditure and revenues correctly is very important. That means you need policy formulations and performance analysis, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, MG Narega. If you see Economic and Political Weekly, in review of women's studies, there have been special numbers on gender responsive budgeting, where Padmini Swaminathan has done a gender audit of midday meal scheme in Tamil Nadu. Maitreyi Krishnaraj has done study of gender budgeting in gender audit of Maharashtra Employment Guarantee Scheme, started way back in 1976. Chaya Datar's very important in-depth field-based study that is also now it is being used by the Mantralaya and by the different ministries for gender responsive implementation. So allocating resources efficiently among sectors, because we know there are so many countries which played historic crises, like Russia after the revolution, when the whole focus was on industry and the agriculture sector was neglected. It created Caesar's crisis, okay? Industry, but agriculture was completely destroyed. Farmers, they eat up their own horses. There was a tremendous food shortage. Now also Russia has to import wheat, okay, and India is also a supplier to Russia. So this kind of allocation to different sectors has to be very judicious according to the assessed needs of the country. Ensuring compliance with the budgetary resources approved by legislature, any budget, whether it is of your TISs, then your Senate has to pass it. If it is of Panchayat Corporation, Standing Committee has to pass it. If it is a state budget, Legislative Assembly has to pass it. And if it is a union budget, it's the Parliament of India that is that passes the budget. So, and day-to-day administration of budget, now several state governments have promised to have a complete transparency, like daily account of expenditure as well as revenues to be displayed on the website of the government. Now, when we talk of gender responsive budget, are we asking for a separate budget? No. We are only doing the dissection of government budget to establish gender differential impacts on different sectors. We have shown that the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan in so many areas where Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan became extremely successful. No leakage, no corruption, politicians are committed, community is committed, but still the evaluation of the impact of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan in those regions showed increasing child marriages. How come? ICDS was running very nicely. So children were 0 to 6 age group, children were in ICDS center. Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan was there. So younger brothers and sisters all were in the school. What happened was the adolescent girls who had dropped out of school, they were alone. Both the parents are working in the field or factory. And they saw that this adolescent girl who is now has a role-lessness. She doesn't, and then the parents thought that marriage is the only solution to avoid any kind of a future problem. So then the attention of the government was invited that we can't leave adolescent girls without any kind of a program. So we need to, if we have a ICDS, if we have Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, we also need to have programs for vocational education program, bridge courses, various types of self-employment program for the adolescent girls. And then states after states came up with a program called Sabala. You had this program in Punjab and Haryana. Then so many northern states also came up with the program Sabala. In Tamil Nadu and all, they came up with a program for school dropouts to induct them into the industrial zone. It is a very exploitative condition that also we have seen Sumangali scheme and all, but basically they were targeted at unmarried adolescent girls to be roped in either for teaching or vocational education or employment or some capacity building program. So gender budgeting is concerned with the use of public economics to reduce gender gap in the vital areas. For women, girls, transgender persons, there are 3 states in India which have now become sensitive to transgender persons' needs and demands. Tamil Nadu was the first one. Kerala has completed its census, and Chhattisgarh has also respected some of the demands of the transgender community. For example, separate toilets for them. Then Tamil Nadu has come up with a complete comprehensive budget for their housing, their education, for their old age pension, and also for their jobs. Differently abled persons, they are included in the gender responsive budgeting, and the areas are education, food security, safety, employment, skills. You must have known that just Chhattisgarh state has come up with a special cell for the security of transgender population. There is a special cell where they can tell what kind of harassment and what kind of, first of all, those who are harassing them, they can be brought to book, and also secure places to create like a night shelter and all. So intersectional marginalities of class, caste, ethnicity, ableism, and gender, they need to be taken into consideration when you are coming up with the macroeconomic policies. Another thing is a reprioritization of public spending. Wherever you think that the public spending is wrong, there was a report that PDS, the best quality of wheat in Punjab under the FCI go down, for Food Corporation of India's go down, were used for production of beer. And when the women in the Panchayati Raj institutions came to know of it, there was a big demonstration and protest by these women, and they said that when food security is the most important issue, how can the politicians use this kind of best quality wheat for production of alcohol. As it is, Punjab is overproducing alcohol, we don't need it. And they forced the state to divert the wheat, which was already taken over by alcohol industry. They took it back and it was sent to the public distribution system. So this kind of efforts, whenever women are organized. In fact, in Maharashtra, we have seen, or even Andhra Pradesh, we have seen, where women have organized, like women in the rural areas, like Panchayati Raj institutions, who are working under the banner of Mahila Rajya Satta Andolan. They also demanded reprioritization in public spending, and they also said that villages where women, 50% of women in a Gram Sabha, if they say by raising their hand that they don't want alcohol shop, no license should be given in that village. So this we have seen this thing. In Tehri Garhwal, women in the Himalayan valleys, there also in so many Gram Sabhas, women have ensured reprioritization in public spending and transparency and accountability for revenue generation. How do you generate revenue? Because states after states, they say that alcohol is the best way of generating revenue because it gets the highest number of excise duty and sales tax they get. But the women in the villages, they are at the loggerheads. They said that we can generate revenue by so many productive economic activities in agriculture, in cottage industry, in textile and handloom industry, in food processing and food production industry. Why this obsession about alcohol? That is the question which the women in the rural areas, Panchayati Raj institutions have been asking. And lifting the veil of statistical invisibility of unpaid care economy. Because if you go by the statistics, the official statistics show currently only 21% of women as a part of workforce. Okay, they are the ones who are getting income or salary or day wages or honorarium. But what about all those who are doing cooking, cleaning, carrying, collection of fuel, fodder, water, animal care, care of the sick? All these, it is not considered by the official data system as a work. They are considered as outside the workforce. So now there is a global voice about acknowledgement, recognition of unpaid care work, reduction of drudgery-prone unpaid care work, and also redistribution of unpaid care work, because first time we have got the data, time use analysis, TUS data by Ministry of Statistics in 2019, which is based on on the day of enumeration, the enumerator asked the respondent, what all did you do in previous 24 hours? And in this previous 24 hours, whatever is told by the respondent from the time they get up till they go to bed, they tell the checklist is made, and this checklist is divided into personal work. If you brush your teeth, if you bathe, if you watch TV, it's a personal work. Care work, cooking, cleaning, carrying, bringing water, fuel, water, looking after the sick, that is care, unpaid care work. And then this is the wage work for which you are paid. So if you divide each and every individual's 24 hours into these three categories, what was found that when it comes to unpaid care work, Indian women are doing 10 times more unpaid care work than the male counterparts. Their men are doing only 29 minutes per day, while Indian women are doing nearly 6 hours a day. Another very important concern in gender responsive budgeting is the equality and efficiency dimension. 50% of the population, you just can't leave them out of your macroeconomic planning. And other thing is also that when 50% of this population starts contributing to the nation building, then your nation gets better. First of all, self-actualization, productive involvement of each and every citizen into the effort of nation building, and also it also increases the national income. World Economic Forum's data also shows that the countries where work participation of women is between 45% to 65% of the population, those countries have a double-digit economic growth. Currently, if we see among the 90 countries about which the data is shared with UNDP, it shows that India and the Pakistan, they have the lowest work participation rate. Behind us is only one country, that is Pakistan. All other countries have a better work participation rates. Even Bangladesh has gone ahead of us. Transforming macroeconomic policies to ensure gender justice, social justice, distributive justice, as per the promise of Millennium Development Goal and Sustainable Development Goal by 191 countries, that includes India also. Now, there is a 5-step approach to gender responsive budgeting for where you can translate gender commitments into financial commitment. First is a situational analysis of what men, women, girls, boys, transgender person with differently abled persons are doing, what kind of opportunities do they get in the economy or particular sector, whether it is education or nutrition or health or employment or skill or safety, transport, sports, all these sectors, what kind of allocation they are making. Currently, we have known that so many women in our country, they got the awards in the Olympics in Japan. Now, did the state invest in them or their only families have invested? There are some cases where the farmers have sold off their land to train their daughters. They were trained, okay, while the state has not done. Why there is such a differential response of the sports ministry towards sportsmen and sportswomen? Okay, the unit cost of allocation for sportswomen is hardly 12 rupees. What do you get in 12 rupees? All the hostels and playgrounds and training centers and coaches, everything is cornered by boys. The unit cost for boys sportsmen is around 200 rupees. So this kind of discrepancy in the ministerial budgets have also been questioned. Visibility of gender in statistics and indicators becomes extremely important for proper allocation as well as targeting of the budget. Assessing the gender responsiveness of the sectoral policies, whether it is with these new policies which come up, whether it is agriculture, farm labor policy or labor codes, where we have seen recently 48 national level legislations and 200 state-specific legislations have been reduced, compressed into 4 labor codes. Now, in this whole labor codes discourse, there is no mention of women. A whole discourse is about he, him, and his. Women are mentioned only with regard to maternity benefits. Even sexual harassment at workplace, which is rampant, that is also not mentioned in this labor codes. So when you talk of social security and social protection, registration, and various affirmative action, everything would go to men. There are so many sectors like sugarcane industry or a construction industry where you have a Jodi system. And this Jodi, one man, one woman, man takes away everything. Women hardly gets barely her subsistence. So it's very important to understand that even in the sectoral policy, we have to see that they are gender responsive. Assessing budget allocations. You may have a very good program like a Balika Samriddhi Yojana, or you may have a microfinance support to SHGs, or you may have this thing of a women entrepreneur scheme. But overall budgetary allocation is very limited, very small. Then the small amount is allocated, then also it doesn't help. It just remains, it is totally ineffective. So when we need, what we need is a very good policies, designing of the policies, and also budgetary allocations. Monitoring the spending and service delivery. Here is a classic example is that of Nirbhaya Fund. Nirbhaya Fund was allocated 1,000 crore per year, was allocated after Nirbhaya tragedy in 2013. Now also, then the evaluation of Nirbhaya scheme shows that there is a gross underutilization of Nirbhaya Fund. Hardly 4 states have used Nirbhaya Fund with nearly 40 to 60%. There are states after states where there is 100% non-utilization of Nirbhaya Fund. Most of the Nirbhaya Fund goes only in installation of CCTV camera, but all other things like support to the survivor of domestic violence or survivor of sexual violence or acid attack survivors or survivors of trafficking, none of these things, even the shelter homes, which are also subcontracted to the either NGOs or civil society organizations, they are also poorly funded. And lot of irregularities are there. TISS report has shown what kind of situation the shelter homes in Bihar and UP, and when the Ministry of Women and Child Development commissioned the study. So it is very important that not only allocation, but we also need to assess the outcome, whether the schemes, whether it is a scheme for Swadhar, which is for women in difficult circumstances, or the scheme for survivor of sexual violence. Several states have it. In Maharashtra, it is called Manodaya scheme. Majlis has done a study of what is the outcome of such scheme, or a scheme for acid attack survivors. Now, are they very lengthy? Currently, we have seen rapid assessment studies under the lockdown. So there is a Ajivika Bureau, there are several other trade unions, and also Indian Social Studies Trust, iWage, all of them have done a rapid assessment studies of MGNREGA. Currently, 1,10,000 crore are allocated to MGNREGA after reverse migration, because nearly 33% of the migrant workers, that means more than 4 crore migrant workers, are still in the villages. They haven't come back, so to the city. Now, that's why MGNREGA started. But what is the situational analysis? Is it effective? Is it generating rural infrastructure as it was proclaimed in the Atmanirbhar Bharat Yojana or Garib Kalyan Yojana, where 125 schemes have been allocated to 8 states where there is a highest out migration? And how these migrant workers who have gone back to the village, how can they be employed, given productive employment? At the same time, the rural infrastructure, which is a need of an hour, that's what the pandemic has also shown us, where you need public health infrastructure, containment zones, COVID centers, you need good medical health posts and primary health centers that needs to be created, and also other food processing industries and food production industry, preservation technologies and all these various schemes are there. Now, what has been the outcome of these schemes? And several state governments have asked the Ajivika Bureau or several NGOs, they are working like Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh, or they work with them to assess the outcome of these schemes. Now, we have seen that wherever the gender responsive budgeting is judiciously implemented, especially in terms of protective and welfare services, for example, pension for widows and destitute, budget for shelter homes, or rehabilitation centers for women survivors of violence. These are the schemes. In certain states, we see some good practices. For example, in Delhi, you have more than 80 shelter homes, night shelters for migrant workers. I have visited 3 of them for women, the night shelters for women in Karol Bagh, in Chandni Chowk, and Trans Yamuna. And the kind of facilities they are given, the security, there is a social worker, there is a counselor, they have a safe drinking water, each one is given a personal locker, and they are also respectfully called city makers. They are the ones who have come to Delhi city for the mega development projects. So so can this model be replicated in other cities? So that kind of work is also very important. Another thing, there have been also the tremendous critique of the pension for widow, which is also, some states are giving 2,000, some are giving 800, but giving cash to a widow or a destitute doesn't help much. What we need is a far more halfway home or a night shelter, and also with the counselor and someone to talk to. The community center should be there. It should be community based. That has been the demand. So the same money can be used by changing the design of pension scheme, just by doling out cash to a person who is otherwise also very vulnerable in the community, where any bully or an antisocial element or a greedy relative can just take away her money and she just remains as destitute as ever. So that doesn't help. Secondly, coming to the social services, for example, budget of provision for education, health, crash, working women's hostel, fuel, Ujjwala scheme, fodder, water, housing, sanitation, nutrition, and midday meal scheme. This is also very strong, very important component of the budget of Ministry of Women and Child Development. And third, and equally important, is the regulatory services, state commissions for women, gender cells within the police force or within the local self-government bodies, gender cells in the various government, all government department, mandatory gender cells you need to have, ICC, Internal Complaints Committee. So these all are regulatory services for which also we need budgetary allocation, and that it should be adequately, it should not be the token amount, they should be adequately functioning, because they have to run the helplines, they have to run the counseling services, they have to provide the emergency support to women in difficult circumstances. And awareness generation program, like you may have so many good schemes, but there is no awareness about it. So it's very important to take these services through public, through FM radio, through television, through public education advertisements in the newspapers. That is very important. Now, if we see the history of gender responsive budgeting, Australia was the first country to provide gender responsive budgeting as a result of youth movement. It was the young women in Australia who demanded, because they are asked to become economically independent once they have a 15th birthday, their parents say that now you have to fend for yourself. And it becomes very difficult at such a young age for a woman to continue her education, to find the shelter. So many times the people who supposedly help them, they only take their advantage. Teenage pregnancy is a very important challenge in the industrialized world. It is not only a problem of only developing country or of Africa, but everywhere. So it is in response to multifaceted problems which a young woman faces in the industrialized world that Women's Students Organization demanded gender responsive budgeting from the government. And Australia started doing that in 1984, and this was considered as a best practice, and so many other countries also started studying Australian case. And South Africa followed, because when the apartheid regime was toppled and President Nelson Mandela became president, it was the women's wing of African National Congress which demanded state African government to come up with a special budget for African women's education, for their reproductive health needs, for their employment, for their skill development, and also for the overall leadership which they can take in the nation building. Through participatory process of involving parliamentarians and NGOs, because Africa had they had toppled the apartheid regime, and African National Congress had come to has wielded power, and they asked the parliamentarian to sit with the NGOs who were trained in identification of practical gender needs, which are like a day-to-day needs of the community, and strategic gender needs. That means by strategies which would very quickly bring gender inclusiveness. For example, Maharashtra, when it decided in 1991 to have 30% seats for women in engineering colleges, it was a strategic gender needs. With one stroke of pen, all engineering colleges in Maharashtra had to reserve 30% seats in engineering colleges, including in IIT Mumbai. But actually what we see scenario is that of only 17%. So only reservation or affirmative action is not enough. Along with that, we have to provide so many other support services and also inculcate interest of girls in STEM subjects right at an early age. So for that, we need to even change the gender norms. So it's a long journey. Commonwealth initiative to integrate gender into the national budgetary process was started in 1997. And we also saw that after that, European Union, when it was formed, all the European countries had a 40% reserved seats for women parliamentarians who also demanded gender responsive budgeting. They took help of person like Diana Elson from Manchester University, Naila Kabir from Sussex University, London School of Economics, also so many women economists. They worked with them to come up with the gender responsive budgeting in their respective countries. Gender budget initiatives are currently being attempted in 84 countries, following diverse trajectories in terms of process, partners involved in undertaking. So there are countries where it is the civil society organizations which are playing very important role. There are countries where different ministries, in India it is the ministries are organizing gender budget training. There are countries like Bangladesh, you have NGOs which are playing very important. Right from 1971, liberation of Bangladesh, NGOs have played a dominant role in governance and also in the economic development of the country. So they are the ones who became the prime mover of gender budgeting processes. In countries which are driven by ethnic strife or civil war. There it is the military or army which is trained, or the UN peacekeeping force. In Afghanistan, it was the UN peacekeeping force which was trained in gender responsive budgeting, so that they could establish schools and hospitals and clinics and training centers for all those who were out of the workforce as well as out of the education system. The strategy for gender responsive budgeting is that, first of all, increasing the budgetary allocation in the existing budgets, improving the quality of resources, for example, gender training for public servants, the greater funding certainty during, including the spending of funds as planned, no ad hocism, that 1 year you give fund for crash, next year you scrap it. That cannot be done. Redistributing budgetary allocations to suit the needs of equity and equality. Changing the type and quality of goods and services delivered by the government. Let us take an example of Janani Maternity Benefits Act. Maternity benefits, budget for maternity benefits, which was allocated in 1993. After gender economists of India, Devki Jain, Maitreyi Krishna, all of them, they made a representation to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, who was at that time a finance minister. The structural stabilization policies had created tremendous reduction in the state budget on health services, and that's why if women's reproductive health were suffering the most, their maternal mortality and child mortality had to be addressed. So government came up with the maternity benefits for women in the poverty groups. But in that, they had not specified when would women be eligible to get the maternity benefits. So when the pregnant women approaching states after states, we saw that maternity benefits fund was totally unutilized. Why? Because there was no clarity. If a pregnant woman approached the bureaucracy or the district authorities, they were said, you haven't delivered the baby. Why are you asking for maternity benefits? If a woman who had delivered the baby and asked for maternity benefits, the bureaucrat would say, but you have already delivered the baby. Now what are you asking for? So this is the kind of anomaly it was created. It was only Kerala which 100% utilized maternity benefits funds, which were allocated by the Union Ministry. So there was a demand that we need to design the scheme in such a way, and especially after 2000, when India promised to reduce maternal mortality and child mortality as per the goal number 4 of Millennium Development Goals, that Janani Suraksha Yojana, where a woman decides where to deliver the baby, and government would directly do the cash transfer to that particular nursing home. And we saw that the states which implemented Janani Suraksha Yojana judiciously, efficiently, and they provided the ambulance service to take women from home to the hospital, we saw the results were improved. And now currently we are showing, I think 122 is the maternal mortality. There was a time where when we had 480 was the maternal mortality in our country. Changing policy. So once you have this kind of a gender sensitive response, then your policy outcomes also, they change. We saw that Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, there are states after states which say that the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan was very, very efficiently implemented. Bureaucrats did not take any bribe. Politicians did not ask for any kickbacks. Villagers were also totally committed. Still, what we experienced, the analysis showed in Midnapur study showed that in that tribal area, all boys were in the school and their sisters had taken over the role of child labor. So it is very important to even question, even when there is an honest implementation of program, the patriarchal biases, gender biases, biases against transgender community that we have seen, that how even in the schools, they are being discriminated, they are thrown out of the school system. So policy outcomes also need to be very meticulously examined. What we saw in 1975 was a global call for gender equality. 1975 International Women's Year. Throughout the 10 years of International Women's Decade, so many country-specific programs and country reports were created, which resulted into local initiatives, and more women started taking leadership, was new leadership among young women, which also entered the electoral politics in several countries. Currently, if we see Rwanda, which was totally destroyed with ethnic tension, as 65% of the parliamentarians in Rwanda are women. Okay, and and they are emerged as a local leaders, and in course of 20-30 years, after 5 or 6 rounds of election, now they are in the parliament. So local initiatives, and once you are elected, you have to deliver. Only if you are just there only for flag hoisting, people will laugh at you. It was in 1994 when we adopted 73rd and 74th amendment in the Constitution of India, with 33% reservation of women in rural and urban local self-government bodies. It was a Yuva organization in Mumbai, Youth for Unity and Action. It was Minar Pimple who organized first training, and he invited me as a teacher of economics and Neera Desai as a women's studies expert. They said that all these first-time women corporators, they are being ridiculed by male corporators. When they went to attend the first meeting in the BMC hall, they were laughed at. And they said, what do you know? Your utility is only just for flag hoisting on 15th August and 26th January. At the most, you can garland the statues of our leaders. What else? Do you know budget? Have you seen the budget book of BMC? It is the wealthiest municipal corporation in Asia. It deals with crores and crores of rupees. Its budget is more than that of state of Maharashtra. And these women corporators were very insulted. And that is how my involvement in gender responsive budgeting started, because it started in 1994, though officially our country started it in 2005 when the finance ministry sent the first GR. Now, with this, gender sensitive training became very important, livelihood and support services, because new economic policies had created tremendous, the opening up of Indian economy had created tremendous insecurity and feminization of poverty, and also the question of violence against women. Vienna Conference in 1993 also brought to the fore increasing backlash of violence among women. So anytime you talk of gender budgeting, violence against women has to be included, because whenever women try to change the status quo, they ask for their rights, what they face is violence. And as a result of which, what we got is a gender empowerment, broadened potential for social capacity building, and also greater people's participation. So if we see the whole genesis of gender budgeting, it was whole exercise that started in 74, got included into the 6th five-year plan, where the new chapter called Women in Development was introduced. Shram Shakti report, when Elaben Bhatt became a Rajya Sabha member, she came up with a very comprehensive report where all hundreds of women studies scholars and women activists were involved in data collection voluntarily, not for money. National Perspective Plan for Women in 1988, which gave a vision statement from 88 to 2000. 8th five-year plan made a declaration that benefits of development from all sectors should be targeted, cannot bypass women, and they also should reflect greater gender sensitivity. 9th five-year plan talked about women component plan, the way we have a scheduled caste plan, the way we have a tribal sub plan, the way the same way 30% of the funds and benefits earmarked for women-related sectors in all anti-poverty programs. And the 10th, 11th, and 12th plan, what we saw when Madam Dr. Saida Hamid was a member of Planning Commission, they also said this WCP, Women Component Plan and Gender Responsive Budget, should converge. And that's why the gender responsive budget is very important for process of greater transparency, deepening of democracy, and to compensate for the historical injustice that women and all the marginalized sections face. And that's why it is considered as one of the affirmative actions for GRB. When it comes to the transgender community, for the first time we are seeing in last 5 to 6 years, LGBTQIA community has also started articulating their thoughts, and they have started demanding gender responsive budgeting. They have come up with their own data sources. Companies and corporate world has also responded that what kind of marginalization they are facing. They have demanded statistical visibility of transgender community and sexual minorities in the data system. And that's why we see that now there is a, it is not, when we talk about gender responsive budgeting, it is not limited only to women, but they have to, UN Women has also come up for gender responsive budgeting in the 5 critical areas: economic participation, economic opportunity, political empowerment, educational attainment, health and well-being, with the commitment that there has been historical neglect there are institutionalized misogynist patriarchal hegemony, and which has created the gap between formal equality and substantive equality. And that's why we need to specially focus on the most marginalized, Dalit, tribal, disabled, Muslim, HIV positive women, sexual minorities and all. So with this, Women Empowerment Policy 2001 also has given commitment to fully empower women politically, educationally, economically, and legally, and also integrate gender budget processes in all ministries and departments. So this is the cycle that we start with the poverty alleviation. Good governance is important. Accountability to the community. It's a public fund, so you have to have accountability and transparency. Economic efficacy is very important. Your schemes and programs, they have to be evidence-based, and they also should be implemented. And gender equity is creating a structure to reach the goal of equality. So actors in gender budgeting, as I told, you can be civil society organization, elected representatives, sensitive bureaucrats, and they all play a role. The gender responsive budgeting is a bridge between the state, which has resources, and community, and different members of the community have different demands. And we have also seen that wherever there has been budgetary allocation for women's programs, we have also seen empowerment. For example, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan has changed the scenario. And wherever there have been budgetary cuts, we have seen reduced opportunities for women, especially privatization of higher education, privatization of professional courses, structural adjustment and globalization, which are marked by devaluation of rupee, price rise, erosion of PDS, agrarian crisis, and unemployment have played havoc with women's lives. The history of Planning Commission also, if we see, as the sensitivity towards women's question increased, the budgetary allocation, the new schemes and programs started coming. I think I have exceeded my do I have time? Do I have time?
Vibhuti, yeah, in another 5 minutes probably. Oh. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we can see that there was a first 5-year plan had allocated 4 crore rupees to start Central Social Welfare Board, mainly because of the insistence of 3 women who were managing the refugee camps when India had experienced pain of partition. That was Mridula Sarabhai, Pushpaben Mehta, and Kamlaben Patel, who were offered ministerial berth for their heroic work. They refused to join politics or government, but they say that if the state respected their work, it was a duty of the state to look after these abandoned, deserted women whose family members had refused to accept them because they were raped or some of them were pregnant at this. So this is how the first allocation happened. Term gender budgeting was not there. And as we saw that after that, for population stabilization, population control, 30,000 Mahila Mandals were created, second 5-year plan. Third 5-year plan talked about women's education, educated women produce less children. If the child survival improves, then there'll be less number of children. So the RCH program, reproductive and child health program change was allocated. Fifth 5-year plan, where we shifted because of the Towards Equality report, there was a paradigm shift from welfare to development. And then we had a special understanding of development as a health, education, and employment. These were the indicators accepted. So 6th 5-year plan onwards, we had a separate chapter on women in development. And after that, we have seen that the allocation has increased. Earlier, we used to critique the budget after it was presented. Now, even in the pre-budget discussions, gender economists are invited. For example, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, they invite gender economists in this thing. These 4 states have also given separate gender budget statement as a booklet this year, both in local language, that means Kannada and English, Tamil and English, Malayalam and English, and Marathi and English. There are 4, whenever you see any budget, whether it is of your housing society or of your university or of your NGO, you have to see, first thing, use your gender lens and see whether how many provisions are there which are 100% targeted on gender. How many are pro-women scheme? 30%. How many gender-neutral schemes are there which are meant for all? And which are the residual fund which is just lying there in your institution, organization, or this, which can also be used for gender concerns? And what we have seen that there are certain flagship programs, Women's Takes, Indira Awas Yojana, Rashtriya Gram Swaraj Yojana, scholarships for minority, MG Narega, where we need to do gender audit. How many beneficiaries are there? Even in the, after say from 2005 to 2020, in this 16 years, we still have so many unresolved issues in gender responsive budgeting. One is gender widows pension, women friendly transport. It's hardly in 4 or 5 cities in the country we have. Housing for women, financial inclusion of women, and charging of differential rate of interest. Only one state, Andhra Pradesh, is charging differential rate. No clarity on women's component in the flagship programs on education, water, health, sanitation, public toilets. Underpayment of women workers, NRHM, Asha workers, Anganwadi workers, though they are employed by the government, they are not even treated workers, they are not given minimum wages, so no budgetary allocation is made, they are only given honorarium. Absence of women-friendly approach in the Skill India, Stand Up India, Startup India. Now there is a demand that there should be quota, 30% quota for women in all these flagship programs, which are heavily funded, and financial support to women entrepreneurs and supportive schemes for transgender persons. A scheme under GRB in the last decade, where the women's organizations, trade unions, women's study centers, and Seven Sisters national level organizations, they managed to get conditional maternity benefit scheme, National Mission for Empowerment of Women, scheme for leadership development of minority women, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, crash scheme for working parents, rehabilitation of trafficked women and girls, Nirbhaya fund for girls and women. But what we need is now recognition of women's centrality or the centrality of gender in all these schemes, and also the audit. What have they done? What gender economists are demanding is a separate listing of women-specific items, no diversion of women component fund, transparency about allocation and utilization, right to information, the way Aruna Mazdoor Kisan Sangram Samiti uses right to information in Rajasthan, inclusion of gender economists in pre-budget discussion, and also composite program for women and girls under education, health, rural development sector to target them specifically where the principal beneficiaries. And we also need to have disaggregated data. Need to place restrictions on the reappropriation. Anytime there is an unutilized fund, Ministry of Defense is always ready to take to buy some more warplanes and to buy some more tanks. That should not happen. NIRD and UNDP study showed that women elected representatives in Panchayati Raj institutions, they did 12 very important tasks in terms of practical gender needs. As a result of this study in 2002, we saw so many state governments unanimously passed resolution of increasing the quota from 33% to 50%. Unutilized fund is a major problem that we have. There are MPs and MLAs, star MPs and MLAs who give extremely erudite and in their lectures. They haven't used a penny from the fund which is allocated to each one of them for their constituency development. So we need to ask our representatives also in our constituency how they are using. National Commission for Women, State Commission for Women had to play a proactive role. There have been examples of Devaki Jain and Alia Bhatt in Karnataka who created the model of bottom-up budget, sitting with the community and preparing the budget. In Rajasthan, we have seen NGOs have come up with the green budget. We have also seen child rights organization in Chennai who have come up with the child audit of budget. Elderly citizens organization, they talk about, they have come up with the elderly people's budget. Right to P campaign in Mumbai, led by Coro for Literacy. They have also done the gender audit of budget, sanitation budget of PMC. So formation of gender budget cells is mandatory in all the government organizations. And now slowly and gradually, even the non-government civil society organizations are responding. Recently, under the COVID pandemic, there is a new slogan that has come that in 1975, we talked about women in development. Now what we need is a women-led development, because the 18 countries where you had a women president or prime minister or health minister, they had the best response. They put people before profit, and they could contain damage of coronavirus the most, and they stood by the public in the context of health emergency. These are some of the very important videos you can watch yourself. They are there on YouTube. They are made by UN Women. There are small case studies of India, Brazil, Timor-Leste, Indonesia, Morocco, Philippines, and they have shown that what was the situation before the gender budget was implemented and what happened as a result of gender responsive budgeting. And these are some of the references that I have. They are all in public domain. They can be easily downloaded from the net or the UN website. Yeah.
Thank you, Vibhuti, for that really comprehensive talk. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. Yes.
Thank you so much for that really comprehensive talk. You in fact touched upon all aspects of gender responsive budget, looking at its genesis, looking at the specificities, talking about both the macro and micro picture. Thank you so much for that, and I'm sure that particularly our students will immensely for our students immensely helpful for this.
Thank
so
you.
I will keep it open for discussion, and I'm sure there'll be more questions to ask, and there are many students in the audience, and I would ask them perhaps to start some conversations first. So can we have some questions from the audience? Anybody wants to ask any question? So I will also come back to you people. Yeah, somebody's asking.
Yeah. Good evening, ma'am.
Your name, please. It shows Vibhuti Patel.
Okay. Good evening, ma'am. I'm Dr. Ketki Tarakumaya, and I'm an assistant professor from the realm of political science. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate you for this intellectual feast that we were offered. I think it was absolutely wonderful and very substantive analysis by you. I'd like to put up a question that why are we just restricting ourselves to a 30% slot only cohort? Why don't we go for a 50%? When we speak of sharing or when we speak of having visibility, why do we begin it with a 30%?
Yeah.
When you're speaking of when we are the better halves in the economy, when we are the better halves in the politics, in the realm of politics, why do aren't we confining ourselves first? And moreover, I feel when you are giving, when you're putting the ball in their court, I mean, in the male court, then don't you think they'll take us very lightly? Why do we always begin with the 30% cohort every time? Be it in the parliament, be in the, even about representation in the parliament also, we begin with a 1/3 representation. So what exactly do you deduce? I mean, do you deduce from
the
it?
debate started in 1964. When the women freedom fighters were totally against any kind of reservation, because they say their argument was that we also work shoulder to shoulder with men. We never asked for any. They came from an upper caste and privileged section. They had studied abroad, and they were very powerful women. So there was a tremendous opposition for women politicians themselves that why do we need reservation? But it was realized that the manpower, muscle power, and money power was becoming more and more. Muscle, money, and mafia power was becoming increasingly important factor in winning election. We saw that by late 60s, that was found. And this is the time where some people, they said, if you want to humanize politics and if you want to deal with the criminalization of politics, we should have more women in the public domain. And there was also a lot of naming and shaming in the global world also, that when women played such an important role in India's freedom movement, why aren't they seen in the decision-making bodies? So that was also there. For 30 years, we had this debate among bureaucrats, politicians, and academicians, and some said 10%, some said 15%, some said 1/4, 25%. Then the political theory, political scientists, they said that we should have a critical minimum. What is critical minimum? If you are 1 or 2 in the decision-making body, you can be cowed down. I remember when I was in Bombay University, they would take me in a topmost body, but I was told to open my mouth only to yawn or to eat, okay, not to speak. The same thing was the UN. Before 1975, they would take 1 or 2 women in all those apex bodies. And this woman, the moment she tried to speak, they would ask her to bring sandwiches or to bring coffee. One day she got so wild and she said, I don't make coffee, I make policy. That became a global slogan of our time when I was a student. Okay. So with this kind of, women also started pressurizing. There was a lot of the countries, the Nordic countries where women were in public life, their examples were there. And they said that if we have a critical minimum, out of 7 members, if you have 3 members are women, they can push their agenda. Okay. And they said, our ultimate goal is 50-50, but let us start with 33%. And that's what happened in the local self-government body. In 94, it was 33%. Once the impact era that women are ready to join the electoral process as a candidate, not only as a voters, they were always there, but they are ready to join the public life. They are ready to face the hardships of mainstream politics, no, because character assassination, isolation, so many things happen. No confidence motion, so many problems women had to face. In spite of all these hurdles, when women have shown that they mean business, and we have seen, like currently you saw in Bombay Municipal Corporation, a woman corporator gave 3.5 hour lecture on gender budgeting in 2020. Nobody had nerve to stop her, because she knew the ground reality of each and every ward of the city, what is happening in each and every war room, because now we have war room, no, under COVID. And she knew, which statistics she knew. And they said how many community kitchens are required, how many COVID centers are required, how many isolation wards are required, how many. She was just telling everything based on her actual field data. And they respected her. So it is in this context that in Panchayati Raj institutions, we got from 33% to 50%. Now 20 states in India have a 50% reservation, but de facto, even in the most patriarchal state like Bihar, you have 70% women in Panchayati Raj. Maharashtra has some 15, I think, villages where you have all women panchayat. That means not only in the reserved seat, but even in the open seat, villagers have elected women. Because they found them honest, they did not take bribe, they stopped child labor, they stopped trafficking of children, they stopped alcoholism and all those. There are many reasons for which they did that. So in 33% argument, it's to start with. Like, see, we have 30% reservation for IIT. Okay, women. Why are there only 17% girls in IIT? Bindu Lakshmi stays on IIT campus. Ask her. Even when the state is provided, Bombay Police, Maharashtra government, 20 years back, Maharashtra government said that 25% of reserved seats in police force. How many girls applied? First of all, girls are so malnourished. Their body mass index. First, let us make our girls healthy. Let them have a body mass index where they feel confident to join the police force. They don't give. And who gives them training? Our SNDT Nursing College and the sports department of SNDT gives police training for 10 days, which is called Swavalamban, no? So, Atmasiddha scheme.
Okay.
So we need to create that kind of support system also. So that we have science and technology was the first Ministry of Science and Technology to implement 30% allocation. Where were the takers? They gave 30% allocation of Ministry of Science and Technology, means quite a lot. It means huge budget. There were no takers. It was just unutilized fund. They started Disha scheme for women who had to give up their studies because of marriage or maternity or elderly care. All these MSc or PhD in science. They said, okay, even after a break of 5, 7, 8, 10 years, if you want to rejoin, because it involves a lot of laboratory work and you are not always available at the back end call of your family and all. They started, but where are the takers? So along with budgetary allocation, along with affirmative action from top, we also need to create, change our gender norms so that more and more women come forward to take up such challenges. No? So it's a dual process. pressure from below, laterally also those who are having power, wielding power in those departments, they also become sensitive, and top down where the government will come up with GRs and legislations and allocations.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. I look up to you as a very tall academician, and I think feminist studies are just incomplete without you. Whenever we deal with feminist studies, so I think I look up to you because of your empirical insights. And absolutely, it was absolutely a privilege to hear you. And I think as a policymaker also, because you are a part of many policymaking bodies, so I'd say that yes, you were right in it that there has to be a critical minimum, but why not raise it? Why not? Why don't you become the, the spearhead? I mean, why don't you herald it like a 50%?
Yeah.
Because
no,
you
but that's what the answer they say. When we ask for more, they said, madam, please fill up the gap now only, because where are the takers? So prepare more women to take up the challenge. That is that. Even the union budget for women and child development is utilized only 2/3. We are asking for more allocation, but the utilization first problem, let us tackle the problem of unutilized funds. Because
and why not have a separate
money, you have to work, no?
And I think you only can initiate a separate gender budget also. Like you told that we have a clubbed together, budget. So why not have a separate gender budget? Why
that is listing, only listing, separate listing of allocation. The way Maharashtra government did in 2005. In Marathi, they published a booklet, Mahila Yojana. What is it called? Ghatak. Women component plan. So Mahila Ghatak Yojana. So all the schemes and programs under gender budget, they had taken out a booklet in a publicity department of government of Maharashtra, which was freely distributed to everybody in the village, whosoever visited Mantralaya, so that they could come up with a proposal to solve the problem of unutilized money. They prepared such booklet. So this kind of efforts are very good, so that people know that there is money parked in the ministry. Let it reach the resources, reach the people.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ma'am. Regards, Dr.
In the interest of time, so can we also take a few more questions, Vibhuti? Maybe we can take a couple of questions together. Is that, if that is okay with you?
Yeah.
So no, I'm sure there are students who are also eagerly waiting for asking questions. So Rajiv, you want to?
Yes. So Professor, while giving a presentation, so since we are also, as part of the course, we are tasked with to analyze the text of the policy itself. And you brought up many terms, for instance, like women in development, women-led development, and gender sensitive, and the term feminist economics itself. And so from our other papers, we have also understood how when development discourse talks about women, so there is also homogenization and essentialization of the category of women itself. So do you think when we talk of budgeting specifically, all these terms and the vocabulary in the language also makes a difference? Or if you can point to any specific instance where how these specific terms and language can make a very significant difference as well?
Yeah. So it has also evolved. The kind of language that was used in first 5-year plan, where women were also only seen as a part of welfare. Okay, first 4-year plan saw either women as a producer of babies or as a part of a welfare, because the Central Social Welfare Board was the only scheme which was started by first 5 plan. Was their way of looking at women, and especially the watershed was towards equality report, because that used the overarching framework of women in development, that women, all the processes have marginalized women, or what we need to bring them, we have to bring them into the development course. By 8th 5-year plan, we changed that. We were no more sold to women in development, because when I said that person like Ilaben asked that what kind of women in development you are talking of? The whole development course is so hierarchical. Women are at the bottom of the pyramid. What we need is women to create their own self-organization and bargain, through the strength, bargain with the economy. So then the bad development, where all the resources of the development projects should go to women by then. And then from learning from the Dalit movement and tribal movement, women's gender economics also started talking about women component plan. The way you have a scheduled caste plan, the way you have a tribal sub plan, what we need is this thing. And the same way, minority, after Sachar committee presented the report, minority organizations, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Jain, Parsi and Christian, they said that what we need is a Ministry of Minority Affairs with very, very heavily budgeted ministry. First year there was hardly anything, so they really lobbied and they saw to it that for 4,000 crores were given to them. After that, women from minority communities, they started saying that what is this? We are not getting anything. Everything is going to, you see minority only as a man. Where are women? And then the question of leadership, budgetary allocation for leadership of women in the minority community. That means scholarships, skill training, enterprise development, and all those things. Maulana Azad scheme, which came as a result of it. So we see that once the community gets politicized, they start articulating their needs and demands, then the things change. Currently, we see that last three budgets is the transgender community, which is playing very, very proactive role. There are so many of them who have done the budget analysis. They have given their, and especially those who have entered the politics in Bengal, in Andhra Pradesh, in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu, nobody will respect them as leaders unless they deliver. They have to deliver something to the community. There are expectations that now we have a politician who is representing our needs and demands and aspirations and dreams, will deliver us in terms of schools for us, for hostel, for employment, for skill training, for the protection from violence. So these demands. So I think Mange Bina, that well-known proverb, Mange Bina maa bhi nahi deti. So how is society or Sarkar give you? So you have to articulate your demands. So identity, yes, women's movement also started with identity politics. But with identity, you need to address the challenges of material reality. No?
Thank you, Professor.
Are there any more questions? Any other questions?
Ma'am, this is Swati Rani. Can I ask a question?
Yes. Yeah.
Ma'am, regarding the Asha Tais and women workers in the healthcare, there is nothing specific for them. So if we who are there in healthcare, if we want to demand for the women in healthcare who are not registered under any councils or who do not come under any minimum wages act, how we can help them, and what is the right way to go about if we want some action plan?
I think one we can do is through state government, instead of just like centrally we are focusing, but there are certain state governments which are responsive, no? Like minimum wages, at least state minimum wages should be given to them. So that kind of a mobilization at our level, if we can do at a state level, no, state and union, and along with that, nationally also public interest litigation, if it is filed by Jana Swasthya Manch or all the health organizations, no, demanding minimum wages. First of all, recognition of Asha workers and Anganwadi workers as employees of the government, number one, and number two, minimum wages of the state that should be given to them. No, so that and labor standards also, because currently there are no labor standards. There is a completely law of jungle, no, so far as they are concerned. So job description and the labor standards, that 8 hours of work, if they are working for overtime, plus safe transport, because they are working in such a remote places. No, in fact, the kind of horror stories one has heard of Asha workers and Anganwadi workers, that the officers would go in a jeep would be empty, and these women are walking with saman, with lot of things in their hands, no, because to run the center and all, but still they would not be given any transport. So in the remote places where they are placed, so the charter of demand is there. But I think now the way we did for a Best Bachao, no, where all citizens came together to save BEST, the same kind of thing I think citizens have to take initiative, because all of us have been applauding them over last 18 months as a corona warriors and all, but now it's a time to act. So if the health organizations take initiative, file public interest litigation, organize special press conferences, and also build up a tempo and make representations to the state governments. And if a couple of state governments, 4 or 5 state governments, they come up with a very humane solution, then we can pressurize the union government. No? That if Kerala can do it, why not others? That's what we did in the housing question. If Kerala can have hostel for the workers, why can't other states? Kerala is not a rich state. Gujarat, Maharashtra, Punjab, Haryana are much, much richer than them. It's a question of political will. It is not a question of resources. So the same thing can be conveyed to the center, that if certain states can give minimum wages to ASHA workers and Anganwadi workers, why can't we make it an umbrella legislation applicable to all India?
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Vibhuti, if I can ask a question, one thing would be listening to you, one very strongly coming from your work, the idea of politicization, because when we are talking about gender responsive budget, it has also came with the politicization of community, demand is coming from women's movement, civil society movement, etc. But at the same time, parallelly, what we also see is that increasing privatization and the state is withdrawing from its welfare responsibilities. And also what you have mentioned when you're talking about all the flagship programs, which we see that also paved way for privatization. So where do you see then when there is a shrinking space for politicization and the political nature of our demand, that is there is a shrinking space. Where do you see the way we imagine gender responsive budget in the future? How do you see that?
I think that would be also the private sector also we have to reach out to. So everywhere we'll have to say that, because now when we are talking about more decentralized economy and also everything is not going to be by the state. So getting the idea of highlighting gender gaps in these 5 crucial areas and making everyone responsive to that. So it won't be only state, but even non-state actors also will have to be. And that's what has happened all over the world. These 84 countries where they are implementing gender responsive budgeting, the trajectories are very different. In Bangladesh, you see Bangladesh has superseded India in terms of Human Development Index. Who are the actors? All of them are NGOs. They are non-state actors. All the businesses, self-help groups, microfinance institutions, hospital structures, the educational institutions, universities, everything is owned by NGOs. And they are the ones who are implementing gender responsive budgeting, and at least human development approach they have adopted. And Bangladesh has got much ahead in terms of Human Development Index in last 2 years itself. Only in 2 years, it was one step behind us, and now it has gone, I think, 6 or 7 steps before us. So routes may be different.
Thank you. Are there more questions from the audience? Students? Any of you would like to? This has been really comprehensive. I'm sure there are, and also we will reach out to you, Vibhuti, some of those links which you shared in the PowerPoint, for example, the video links, etc. If you can share it with us,
that
would be really
PPT,
useful.
Definitely,
PPT also you can, if you would like to share, that would be really useful. But some of the resources and the link which you shared,
and these links are also there.
That would
so they are very good. Because this participatory, gender responsive participatory budget processes are captured by UN Women in different countries. I do that. Right.
Any final questions, people? One of the things, it is also quite rich. There is a lot to understand and learn. So I'm sure they can also perhaps reach out to you. So I hope Professor Vibhuti Patel will be available if students want to ask questions. Email her directly. That is also possible. You can please do that. And Vibhuti was in fact that policy paper which we have. She's been part of that paper when Vibhuti was teaching as a professor at Adams and Women's Studies. So. Been immensely helped to shape the way the course has been organized over a period of time. So, all right, if there are no more questions right now, of course, you can reach out individually as well. Or if you have any questions, you can direct it to me and then I will share it with the Vibhuti. We can do that. On that note, we can close the session. I would like to thank Vibhuti once again for, I know that your schedule, you have been traveling in the sense virtual traveling and giving talk and being very, very busy with other responsibilities as well. Within that, you immediately said yes. Thank you so much for that. And the rest of you who have been here today for this talk, thank you. On behalf of Advanced Center for Women's Studies, I would like to thank all of you who have come here, and on behalf of my students as well. Thank you. All right. So we can close the session now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bindu ma'am. Thank you, Vibhuti. Good evening.